The U.S. Coast Guard has released video that it says was taken from a drone tracking a suspected smuggling vessel in the eastern Pacific Ocean. It is unclear when this footage was taken. But the Pentagon says the operation led to a successful interdiction by the crew of Coast Guard cutter Midget. According to Associated Press, meanwhile, the U.S. military on Wednesday launched its ninth strike against an alleged drug-carrying vessel, killing 3 people in the eastern Pacific Ocean, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, expanding the Trump administration's campaign against drug trafficking in South America. It followed another strike Tuesday night, also in the eastern Pacific, that killed 2 people, Hegseth posted on social media hours earlier. The attacks were departures from the 7 previous U.S. strikes that had targeted vessels in the Caribbean Sea. They bring the death toll to at least 37 from attacks that began last month. The strikes represent an expansion of the military's targeting area as well as a shift to the waters off South America where much of the cocaine from the world's largest producers is smuggled. Hegseth's social media posts also drew a direct comparison between the war on terrorism that the U.S. declared after the September 11, 2001, attacks and the Trump administration's crackdown. Later Wednesday, he referred to the alleged drug runners as the Al-Qaeda of our hemisphere. Republican President Donald Trump has justified the strikes by asserting that the United States is engaged in an armed conflict with drug cartels and proclaiming the criminal organizations unlawful combatants, relying on the same legal authority used by President George W. Bush's administration for the war on terrorism. The United Nations says it is working with its humanitarian partners to implement our 60-day response plan in Gaza. According to Associated Press, Ramiz Alakbarov, the UN's Mideast Deputy Coordinator, told the Security Council that the plan sets out concrete measures to streamline customs procedures, expand access routes, facilitate the entry of political items, restore essential services. But Alakbarov said there is concern in the West Bank with thousands of Palestinians displaced in the wake of Israeli security forces' operation and continued closures in and around the refugee camps. Majid Bamia, the Palestinian deputy ambassador to the Palestinians, welcomed the ceasefire and the countries that coordinated it, and pledged to work with the U.S. administration and other partners to move from a ceasefire to a just and lasting peace. Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, said peace will only arrive in the region after, while terror still remains. Danon stressed that 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve.
The UN and its humanitarian partners are working now to implement our 60-day response plan. The plan sets out concrete measures to streamline customs procedures, expand access routes, facilitate the entry of critical items, restore essential services, and ensure the safe movement of humanitarian personnel. While we are focused on supporting the ceasefire and scaling up our response in Gaza, we must not overlook the alarming situation in the West Bank. Tens of thousands of Palestinians remain displaced from their homes in the northern West Bank in the wake of the large-scale Israeli security forces operation and continued closures, particularly in and around the refugee camps. Palestinians must be allowed to return to their homes and local economies need to function. With increased facilitation in the entry of humanitarian supply by Israeli authorities, the humanitarian partners have scaled up aid delivery with a 46% increase in aid tracked by the UN entering the street in the first week of the ceasefire.
Mr. President, we and many others around the world welcome the efforts of President Trump for peace and pledge to work with the US administration and with regional and international partners to move from a ceasefire to just and lasting peace. As was stated by the United States, it is for Palestinians to govern themselves. There is no substitute to Palestinian self-determination. Our role is to collectively work to ensure the ceasefire holds, prevailing over those rooting for its collapse or working to make it fall apart. And we appreciate on that context the collective efforts to ensure this aim and the constant engagement of the mediators of Egypt, Qatar and Turkey, and of course the United States at the highest level to preserve this delicate ceasefire. If after a century of conflict and dispossession and displacement and wars and occupation and colonization and blockade and walls, if after the 7th of October, if after genocide in Gaza, we are not yet convinced that it is time for peace, that we owe future generations peace, what will ever convince us?
There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed.